Welcome to another 10-minute network workout with J. Cooper Smith. This is the second series of how to recover on routes and switches, and this portion of the video is going to deal with the switches in particular. As you can see, I'm unable to gain access to this switch using the normal password. Now, switches are a little bit different than routers, although you will need to reboot them, so let me go ahead and get started on rebooting the switch, and we'll go ahead and talk about the differences between routers and switches. There is a button on the front of the switch, the mode button, that you're going to have to hold down during the power cycle. You will see that the switch is much faster at booting than the router. And we get into this section here. In the router, this was ROMmon, and in the switch, this is a embedded system into the switch, and they give you instructions on what to type in to help you out. Again, we're still going to deal with trying to gain access to the switch, so you're going to have to make sure that you protect the switch physically to prevent unauthorized users from being able to do this. Now, the first command that you want to type in is /_init, and that will activate the flash portion of the switch. Now, on older switches, you would also type in the load_helper. And because it isn't listed up here, this particular switch isn't going to need the load_helper, and that's what you would type in and hit enter. If I tried that now, you'll see that it's an unknown command. Because it wasn't listed up here, I don't need it on this particular switch. So then I'm going to dir the flash to make sure I can see the flash configuration. And there is my config text. That is like the startup config for a router. Okay, that's where all of our information is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rename this file from config.txt to something that I normally do is /config.old. Now, the reason why I have to do the flash colon, oh look, it says that it exists, which means I've done this a couple times. So let's go ahead and, I don't know what that old config.old is, so let's go ahead and rename this /config text to /config.old2, because I don't want to overwrite something that might be important to me. It's okay, I'll just keep it straight in my mind, and so that when we reload this thing, let's go ahead and type boot, and now it's going to boot into the normal default cycle. And because it can't find the config text file or our startup config, it's going to assume that the switch is brand new. So in routers, we deal with config registers, and switches we don't have those. And so it's a little bit different in technology, a little different process. As you can see, we're starting to boot up into the code. And so what's going to happen is, if I wanted to blow away the config altogether, then I didn't really have to rename it. I could have just deleted the config.txt and then get into the switch and then start configuring as normal. But we want to be professional. We want to be as non-destructive as possible. We wanted all of our interfaces to have the appropriate VLANs. So we went ahead and saved the file as config.old, remember 2 at this point in time. And then we're going to go ahead, and once we get into the switch, we're going to load that file or rename that file back to config text so that it can be there for the next time. And then we're going to copy that file as well into our running config. And then we're going to be able to reset all the passwords and be able to have a usable system with all of our previous settings. And we're just waiting for it to go ahead and get done. Okay, and here is that initial configuration as if it was fresh out of the box, or if we wipe the config and we're starting from afresh. So at this point in time we would say no, and you see that we have the default switch name. We can go into enable mode, and without any issues, there's no passwords required anymore. And so now we're going to go ahead and rename our flash file. Here's a listing We're going to go ahead and see and look at our information here. You notice that there is no config text file. You see that I have two config olds, old and old 2. So we're going to go ahead and rename the config old .tool old 2 to flash colon config .text so that we can have that file back in place because we went ahead and bypassed the security. We're just putting everything back to the way it was. And now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the config text file into our running config so that we can go ahead and load all the interfaces with the appropriate VLAN information or whatever our configuration was, and then be able to reset the passwords of that configuration information so that we can now have an operating production style system with our previous config as well as the passwords that we now have set. And as you can see, there's a couple of error messages as the config file is coming in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get into our configuration terminal. We're going to go ahead and change our console password so that we can get into it. And then if I also had any VTY passwords, I would go ahead and change them now. But because I'm going straight console, I'm not changing my VTY passwords. Then we're going to go ahead and change the enable password as well, because what use is getting console if I can't get into the privileged exec mode. So then we're going to go ahead and save our changes. And like anything, once I save my changes, I want to go ahead and exit out of this and be able to test to make sure that my password is working and my enable password is working with a known value. And at this point in time is when I would go ahead and also reboot the system and validate that it boots with my startup configuration and that it um, has the passwords correctly stored within this maintenance window that I have done the password recovery on it. Once again, I thank you for viewing one of the 10-minute networking workouts with Jay Coopersmith.